Welcome to the Transformative Principal podcast, where we learn how to be an amazing educational leader. I am your host, Jethro Jones. Are you ready to be a transformative principal? I'm looking for about 10 people who are ready to do what it takes to lead with integrity, find balance, and take your school to the next level. If you're looking to improve your leadership in a measurable way, go to transformativeprincipal.org/mastermind to see if you qualify to join a group of like-minded people who are ready to be the best principals in the country. Welcome to Transformative Principal. We are in for a treat today. I am talking with Tom Braddock, the principal of Evergreen Elementary, and you're going to love this conversation. We're going to talk about his alternative to violence class that he taught at the high school that became the most popular course at his school and how he did that. Just really great stuff. Definitely something that I think we can all benefit from, and you're going to really enjoy learning from him. So thank you so much for listening. This is an inspiring interview because he talks about how to deal with some of the crazy things that are happening in our world and how you can make a difference in your classroom. So please share this with somebody who needs some additional motivation to keep fighting the good fight and how to make their school even better than it already is. So without further ado, here is my interview with Tom Braddock. All right, welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm excited to have as my guest today Tom Braddock, the principal of Evergreen Elementary in Woodbury, New Jersey. And it's always fun getting people from the East Coast because they're so far ahead of me in time when I'm out here in Alaska. And he's almost ready for bed and I'm just getting up. So, Tom, thank you so much for being a part of the Transformative Principal today.
My pleasure, Jethro. Thanks for having me.
So we talked a little bit before about your past experiences, and I'd love it if you'd share a little bit about how you got into education and how you got to the position where you're currently at.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always grew up with a sense of purpose and mission and wanted to give back to the community that I thought raised me so well. And I thought I was going to run for public office. It was really what I was on track to do. I went to college. I was an international relations major at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. And the interesting thing was the last semester of my senior year, I spent interning down in Washington, D.C. And my roommate at the time was former Speaker of the House, Jim Wright's grandson. And just the stories between his family and the things I experienced during part of my internship, I got jaded on politics really quickly.
Man, that didn't take long.
No,
internship.
It did not. And I wanted no parts of politics after that. And what was really cool is I met a gentleman by the name of Coleman McCarthy. He gave a speech, and he said one of the most noble things you could do with your life is to become an educator and to develop the youth. And I went up to him after that talk, and I said, listen, I want to go to work for you. I was sort of taking the bull by the horns, and he was working in inner city schools teaching alternatives to violence to students, and I just wanted to be a part of that. And he let me do it, and the only way I can describe it is it was like putting on prescription glasses and finally being able to see clearly. And at that point, I knew what I wanted to do with my life, but it was a little late. So fortunately, New Jersey had a dire need for teachers at the time, and they had what was called the alternative route, which is still in place today. And I went back to my alma mater and asked them what I needed to do to become an alternate route teacher. And my superintendent, who was there when I was a student, loved me and told me what I needed to do. And fortunately, a position opened up, and I started in the fall of 2001 and just absolutely dove in head first and soaked up as much as I possibly could to become the best teacher possible. My first year I was not the best. I was probably terrible.
Yeah.
But by year 3, I was getting in the groove, and they provided us with great professional development. And by year 5, I had become the youngest teacher of the year in the history of that school district. And part of that was because I had brought that peace studies or alternatives to violence class to the school district, and I became the number 1 elective in the school, and kids were just really hungry for it. And at the time, I have a young family, so I wanted another challenge and needed an increase in pay. Couldn't raise my family on a teacher salary at the time with my wife at home with our kids, and took on the challenge of becoming an administrator. And so I spent the 7.5 years in the classroom as a high school teacher, and then got my administrative degree. And it's funny, my students always told me, Mr. Braddock, this class is off the charts, but it's too late for us. It's almost like a Band-Aid. This stuff needs to be down in the elementary level. And I I was scratching my head when they said that to me. I'm like, how am I ever going to get down to elementary? But it made sense by doing so through administration. So my goal was to work my way down into a middle school as an assistant principal, and hopefully I would do a great enough job there that school district, if they had an opening in their elementary school, they would give me an elementary principal position. And that's exactly what happened. I landed in Woodbury City Public Schools as the assistant principal of the junior high school, grades 6 through 8, and I worked that job for the last 7.5 years. And then fortunately this past summer, one of the coveted positions that I wanted opened up at Evergreen Avenue Elementary School, and I'm now the principal there.
Well, that's pretty cool. And one of the things that I started out teaching middle and high school as well, also doing alternative routes to licensure, and really loved doing it, but felt the same way about we need to start a little bit sooner.
Absolutely.
So I was a assistant principal in elementary school, and then most recently a middle school principal, and I'm excited about getting possibly back down to elementary again.
Awesome.
And having some impact there as well. So talk a little bit about this alternative to violence elective that you mentioned, and what that entailed at the high school level, and then we'll bring it down to what you're doing at the elementary school level.
Sure, absolutely. So when I was teaching for Coleman in Washington, D.C. at a place called School Without Walls, his program that he had designed was a little more, I would say, literature-based. And I knew after, I wouldn't say being a veteran teacher, but in my third year, that's when we developed the course. And I knew it had to be a little more experiential, and I was going to have students who were honor students all the way to special needs students. And they wanted to pack the class as to the brims if possible. And so I was teaching the class 36 kids deep, kids who were all varying levels, socioeconomic levels, and kids who were children who never got in trouble, and then kids who were, alleged gang members in our school district. And I knew I had to make that class engaging. So what we did, and I'm a firm believer that world peace starts with me. And so what we did is when I designed the class, I started with the individual. What can I do on a daily basis to be more positive, productive, and peaceful? And then the next unit after we went through that, I went into interrelationships. When I'm interacting with other people, what can I do to be more positive, productive, and peaceful? And we provided them with the skills to do just that. And then once we went there, we started looking at communities and the nation. And I went through a lot of the different nonviolent civil disobedience movements that happen around the world. The overthrow of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. We looked at, the overthrow of a dictator. We looked at apartheid in South Africa, solidarity in Poland, obviously the civil rights movement in our country, and many more, just because I wanted kids to see that civil disobedience is a powerful, powerful weapon. And even though the 20th century was probably the bloodiest century of all time, it was also one of the greatest times for civil disobedience movements and peace, making a tremendous difference and bringing about change. And so the students soaked that up, and we really had a great discussion about each of those movements that we took a deep dive into. And then we started looking at the world. What could be done? We were trying to come up with outside-the-box ideas, and we were looking at the amount of money that, countries spend on the military versus, how much they're spending on developing their youth. And we looked at a lot of different social issues around the world, and if we had sort of flipped things on its head, what might the world look like? And so the class culminated with a project where the kids took everything that they learned from becoming more peaceful themselves in their daily life to when they interact with people, becoming a little more peaceful and nonviolent, and then what they could do within our own country as they become leaders to make our own country a little more peaceful and nonviolent, and then what we could do as a world. And it was absolutely fantastic. I still have kids coming and, sharing memories that they had in that class. And what was interesting is a number of them actually went on to college to study peace. And I had one young lady who actually went down to the University of Richmond and designed her own major because of the experience she had in my class. And it was all around, peace and nonviolence. And basically now she works with nonprofits and helping them get up on their feet. And she's just such a social advocate. It's not even funny. So you never know how far your ripples, as an educator, your ripple's going to go. And I just feel really excited when I hear about the youth that took that class, what kind of an impact they're having today. It's great. Facebook helps with that. You get to see the difference that they're making.
Yeah, that's amazing. I wonder what it was that actually pulled the students into that class, because it's interesting to study all of those things, but what do you attribute the actual success of why kids wanted to be in that class to? What was it that made them want to be there?
You know what? It was a practical class. We teach kids 2 + 2 = 4, and they leave school knowing 2 + 2 = 4, but they don't leave knowing that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And so I made the class as practical as could be. I made it fun and engaging. We weren't just sitting there, and I just wasn't, delivering, stories to them or anything like that. We were getting up, we were interacting. I remember I did a world hunger simulation with them one time, and it just was really, the simulation was about power. And just to see how it would play out, the kids were so engaged. It's the most I've ever, as an educator, I've been able to engage kids. But I think deep down, we all want peace. Who wants turmoil in their life? Who wants, violence in their life? No one does. At the end of the day, I think all of our spirits call for peace. And I think once the kids started hearing about how practical the class was, I had this one young lady named Zelita. This young lady was known for fighting all the time, right? And part of it was she didn't know any other way. She only knew what she knew and what she was taught at home and in the streets of our community. And she took that class, and she vowed after taking that class, Mr. Braddock, I'm never going to fight again. And she actually ended up going into the military, and she just, that was a huge victory to know that what I taught that young lady changed her entire paradigm. And she was going to commit her life to, elevating it to a whole nother level. And so I think when the kids started hearing of those stories and they started seeing changes in their friends and, kids committing to being more positive, productive, and peaceful, it's attractive. It's attractive to youth, and they want what the other kids had. And so that's why, that class ended up becoming the #1 elective, and I was 36 kids deep, where most of the electives were, around 20 or so students.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the other parts of that is once you're able to not use violence as a way to solve your problems, then you start to have this confidence and ability to deal with things that starts to get noticed. And I imagine there are tons of stories of that, right?
It was, yeah. So, it's as simple as we were changing their language and their communication styles. And, when we were going into the interrelationships, I told them, listen, when you communicate with people and you're in a conflict with someone and you're coming at them, well, you did this and you did that. Of course, if anybody's hearing those you statements, they're going to feel attacked and they're going to want to, retaliate and maybe defend themselves. I said, but when you approach someone that you're in a conflict with and you say, listen, I'm feeling really frustrated, when you did this, or I feel frustrated when you did this because, and then share the impact that it had on you, how can they argue with your feelings? They can't, and it diffuses the situation. So kids found using I statements very empowering. I said, I'm going to teach you how to get more of what you want in life. Who wants more of what you want in life? And, all their hands would go up and they'd be excited about it. And I would show them, I'd say, listen, I get so much more from life now and just from people in general that I interact with, just from communicating differently. How cool is that? And they all thought that was cool. Yeah. And, when they can actually get those kind of results in their own life, then it becomes real. And then they really believed in what I was teaching them. And it just, went from there. But it just baffled me when they, because I thought I was moving mountains in that classroom. But then when they said to me one day, Mr. Braddock, it's too late at this point. You got to get this into elementary. It's like a Band-Aid by the time you're putting it or implementing this with us. That just really hit me like a ton of bricks. But I knew deep down in my heart that they were right. And that's why I went on my journey to get down to the elementary level.
That's pretty amazing. Before we get to the elementary level, though, I do want to talk a little bit about your world hunger simulation.
Sure.
I'm currently reading a book called The Wave, which is about a simulation that simulated Nazi Germany, and it's a pretty interesting story. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I also, on episode 118 of this podcast, The Transformative Principal, I had an interview with Ken Spiro about education leadership sims and simulations. So there's a link to that in the show notes as well at transformativeprincipal.org. And simulations are a really powerful way to learn a concept or an approach. And if you listen to that one, it talks about how educational leaders can learn and grow by participating in simulations. So I want to talk about what the simulation looked like with your students regarding world hunger.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was really, we talked about world hunger, we looked at statistics, we looked at all those things, but what I did is it really became a simulation of power between the haves and have-nots, which, obviously that there's an issue there with world hunger. And I would go out and I would purchase a large number of chips and Doritos, and that would be representative of the food, and I would give it to a small group within the front of my classroom, and then I would break the class up into a small power group in the front. There were some intermediaries in the middle, and then there was the have-nots in the back. And I really didn't tell them who is who. I just told the individuals in the front, I said, this is your food. You need to try to keep it and protect it. It's your food, but you can decide what you want to do with it, but just remember, it's your food. And then I would go to the kids in the back, and I'd say, listen, they have everything. You have nothing. What are you going to do about that? And I would just set the tone there, and I didn't give them any kind of expectations. Just what are you going to do about it? And same thing with the other students in the front. And I would let it go and see what would happen. And every class was different. There was one class out of all of my classes who the haves actually decided to, and it was remarkable because it never happened in any of the other classes that I taught throughout. And I literally probably taught 1,000 kids in that course over the time that I was teaching there. And one class, the haves ended the simulation early, and they ended up sharing all the food with the have-nots. But for the most part, what happened is the haves would build a fortress. They would have the biggest person in their group defend, and maybe a few of the biggest people in their group. And I would purposely do that too. I would purposely put the biggest individuals in my classroom and the strongest as the haves, and I would put everybody else in the have-nots, sort of representing, military strength, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then those who were the have-nots tended to be the smaller, students in the class as well. And most of the times the haves would really fight them and try to protect the food and not share it. And every now and then they would send, the have-nots would send people forward to try to negotiate and offer things up just to get some of the food. And sometimes they were somewhat successful. There was some mercy shown and a little bit shared, but definitely not the bulk of the food was usually hoarded for the haves. And then we would debrief that. We would debrief that conversation. We would look at some more statistics on what was going on in the world, and we would look at the wealth in the world and how it was distributed. And fantastic conversations were had with the students on just what their thoughts were about that, and was it just? And if not, what could be done? Or I would just try to guide them through a very spirited conversation, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to see how their young minds worked and what they thought about our own country and where we stood and what we should be doing and what we should not be doing.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What do you think? Were there any negative side effects of doing the simulations? Things that kids got their feelings hurt, or how did you deal with those aspects?
We had sort of set the tone in my class. They sort of knew we were just one family in my class. So even if we were engaging in a simulation, they knew what the rules were. I always used to have, I used to have 4 simple rules, and one of those was always keeping it Disney, number one. And even though I would say, I don't want to hear, nowadays Disney is a little more off color than it used to be. But, we're always going to keep it Disney in here, and we're always going to make sure that we're respecting everybody's opinions and beliefs, and we're not going to, denigrate anybody in here. And so my kids in my classes at the time, I had kids telling me that they felt safer and more at home in my class than they did sometimes going on to their own home. And they never wanted the class to end. Oftentimes the end of when the class was coming to a close, there would be tears that would be shed because they couldn't believe it was over. So I never really had an issue with kids being mean or feelings hurt, or if there were, we could talk about it. And I think maybe in all the classes I taught, it may have happened once or twice. And in my 8 years of teaching, I think I may have, on one hand, could count the number of discipline referrals that maybe I had to address. And that was 7.5 years of teaching. We just didn't have that. I really feel if you set the tone and you lead with love, and I'm doing that as an administrator as well. You lead with love, and I'm just a firm believer. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and you can't teach them until you reach them. And so my goal in every one of the classes that I taught was to, right out of the gate, prove to the kids that I cared about them and that I was going to conduct things a little differently. So much so, Jethro, that the very first day of class, outside of my Peace Studies class, but in my U.S. History 1 and World History classes, I would give them a quiz the second day of class on our rules. And I would tell them that, listen, if you get 100% on this quiz, your parents don't have to know what the quiz was on. All they have to know is that you got 100 on it. And I promise you, if you get 100 on this, I'm calling your parents on Friday and letting them know that you got 100 on your first quiz. And that's the first communication they're ever going to have with me. And I'm telling you.
Boy, that's awesome.
And my wife knew, listen, on the first week of school, that Friday, I'm going to be home late because I'm calling every single family of the kid that got 100. And every kid always got 100 on that. And, I would tell them, I said, think about it. How cool would it be? I don't know what your history is, but maybe you've been getting phone calls home that were negative. How cool is it going to be when your teacher calls home and tells your parents you got 100 on your first quiz, and I'm so excited to be your teacher, and you're off to a great start. What's your weekend going to look like? And they'd all laugh and get excited. And sure enough, man, I had them hook, line, and sinker after that next week. They were ready to come in and learn, and they knew that I was different. I was going to do things a little differently for them, and they could trust me and know I had their back.
Yeah, what an awesome strategy. I love that, man. That is so cool because it's so important to have positive phone calls home. Absolutely. And if it can be an academic one in the first week of school, that's fantastic. So
can I tell you, there were parents that would literally cry on the phone on that first phone call and say, Mr. Braddock, thank you so much. You don't know what this means. I've never gotten a positive phone call home before. And so that cinched it for me. When I would hear those tears and those comments and that, these were high school kids and the parents have never gotten a positive phone call home. That's crazy. That blew my mind. And so, I just stuck to my guns from that moment forward. And I just made a commitment that I was going to become the best teacher I possibly could be. I was going to love up on these kids as much as I possibly could, and they were going to know it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What were your 4 classroom rules?
You're going to make me remember, man. It's been a while now, but one was like, be prepared. It was very simple, like be prepared, be active. I wanted them to participate. And gosh, what was the other one? Oh, be here. I wanted them, you can't learn if you're not here. So be here, be prepared, be active, and keep it Disney. Those were the 4 rules.
Okay. Phew, I'm glad you remembered that. That could have gotten awkward real fast, but
right.
That was a really great interview with Tom. Next week, we're going to talk about what he's doing at the elementary school to make them more successful in the beginning so that it's not a Band-Aid, that it's not too late. And you're going to really enjoy that interview. Thank you so much for listening to Transformative Principal. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to review this podcast in iTunes and share it with some friends, that really helps other people find it. So in the show notes at transformativeprincipal.org, there's a little link to iTunes. Go ahead and click that and just leave a quick review. That would mean the world to me. Thank you so much and have a great week.
Transformative Principal is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators by educators. Visit edupodcastnetwork.com for more great podcasts.